The jazz club was packed that Friday night. Every table was full, and people were standing along the walls just to get a glimpse of the show. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with the aroma of whiskey and cigar smoke that somehow still lingered in the old building's walls. Even though smoking had been banned years ago, this wasn't just any club. This was the Blue Note in New Orleans, the kind of place where music legends were born. Tommy sat in the corner booth, tugging at the collar of his worn-out jacket. He felt completely out of place. Everyone around him looked like they belonged in a fashion magazine, wearing clothes that probably cost more than his entire semester's textbook budget. His roommates had practically dragged him here, insisting he needed to get out of the dorm room for once. "Come on, man. You can't just study every single weekend," his roommate Jake had said earlier that evening. "You're in New Orleans. Live a little." Tommy wasn't much of a party person. He was 19, halfway through his second year of college studying accounting because it seemed like a safe, practical choice. He was the kind of guy who blended into the background, never causing trouble, never drawing attention. Back home in his small town in Mississippi, that was perfectly fine. But here, in this glamorous club surrounded by confident people who knew exactly how to carry themselves, he felt like a fish out of water. The lights dimmed, and the crowd erupted in applause. Tommy watched as a tall, elegant man in a perfectly tailored navy suit walked onto the stage. This was Devin Wright, the headliner everyone had come to see. Tommy didn't know much about jazz, but even he had heard of Devin. The man was a legend, featured in magazines, performing at festivals around the world, and his albums had won awards that Tommy couldn't even pronounce. Devin sat at the grand piano with the kind of ease that comes from doing something thousands of times. He didn't need to look at the keys. His fingers just knew where to go. When he started playing, the room fell into a hushed silence. It was beautiful, the kind of music that made you forget about everything else. Notes danced through the air, sometimes playful, sometimes melancholy, telling stories without using a single word. Tommy found himself genuinely enjoying it. For the first time that evening, he forgot about feeling uncomfortable. He forgot about the accounting exam he had on Monday. He just listened. The first set lasted about 45 minutes. When Devin finished, the applause was deafening. He stood, bowed gracefully, and announced he'd be taking a short break. The house lights came up slightly, and the buzz of conversation filled the room again. "That was incredible," Tommy said to Jake, who was already scrolling through his phone. "Yeah, pretty good," Jake replied without looking up. "Hey, they're doing some kind of open mic thing. Says here anyone from the audience can try to play during the intermission." Tommy felt his stomach tighten. He knew where this was going. "Dude, you should totally go up there," Jake said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "No way. Absolutely not. Come on, you told me you used to play piano." "I took lessons when I was a kid. That's completely different." But Jake was already waving over their other roommate Chris, explaining his brilliant idea. Both of them thought it would be hilarious to see their quiet, nervous friend try to play after watching a professional performance. Devin had returned to the stage, microphone in hand. "All right, folks. We do this every Friday. Anyone feeling brave enough to come up here and show us what you've got? Don't be shy now. We're all friends here." The crowd laughed. A few people cheered, but nobody moved. Playing after Devin Wright was like trying to run after watching an Olympic sprinter. It was intimidating on a whole different level. Nobody? Really? Devin looked around, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Come on, I promise I won't judge too harshly. Think of it as free entertainment." That's when Jake stood up and shouted, "My friend here wants to play." Tommy's heart dropped into his stomach. Every head in the section turned to look at him. He tried to shake his head, tried to mouth no, but Jake and Chris were already pulling him to his feet. "Go on, man. It'll be funny," Jake whispered, laughing. Devin spotted the commotion and pointed directly at Tommy. "Ah, there we go. Come on up, young man. Don't be scared." The crowd started clapping, some laughing, others watching with curious amusement. Tommy felt his face burning red. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole, but everyone was watching now, and somehow his feet started moving toward the stage. The walk felt like it took forever. People were smiling at him, some clearly expecting a disaster, others just enjoying the entertainment. Someone near the bar said loudly enough for Tommy to hear, "This should be interesting," followed by laughter. Devin extended his hand to help Tommy up onto the stage. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy," he managed to say, his voice barely audible. Speak up now. Tommy, let everyone hear you. Devin held the microphone closer. Tommy, he repeated, slightly louder. Well, Tommy, have you played before? Or are your friends just having some fun with you? The audience chuckled. Tommy could see people pulling out their phones, ready to record what would probably be an embarrassing moment they could laugh about later. I took lessons when I was younger, Tommy admitted. Wonderful. Well, the piano's all yours. Play whatever you'd like. Devin stepped back, moving toward the bar with his trademark confident smile. He picked up a glass of whiskey, clearly expecting this to be a brief, amusing interlude before he continued with his professional show. Tommy approached the grand piano like it was a sleeping lion he didn't want to wake. His hands were shaking as he sat down on the bench. It was different from what he remembered. Heavier, more substantial. The last piano he'd played was his grandmother's old upright in her living room, and that had been over the first note that came from the piano was soft. Almost too soft. Some people in the back probably couldn't even hear it, but it was pure and clean like a single drop of water falling into a still pond. Tommy's fingers moved to the next note, then the next. He wasn't thinking anymore. He wasn't aware of the hundreds of eyes watching him or the phones pointed in his direction. All of that had faded away the moment his hands touched the keys. It was just him and the music now, the way it used to be in his grandmother's living room on those quiet afternoons. He started with a piece by Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major, his grandmother's favorite. She used to play it on rainy days, and young Tommy would sit on the floor beside the piano, watching her fingers dance across the keys like they were having a conversation with the instrument. In the audience, the scattered laughter began to die down. The woman who had been whispering to her friend stopped mid-sentence. A man who was reaching for his drink froze, his hand suspended in the air. Something unexpected was happening on that stage. The notes were coming out exactly right. Not just right, but beautiful. Tommy's touch was delicate but confident, each key pressed with the perfect amount of weight. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. His fingers knew exactly where to go, like they were remembering a path they'd walked 1,000 times before. Jake, still standing near the table where he'd been sitting, felt his smug grin slowly disappear. He had expected his shy roommate to maybe plunk out some basic melody, maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or something equally simple. This was not that. This was something else entirely. Devin Wright had been taking a sip of his whiskey when Tommy started playing. He'd been smiling, ready to give the kid a polite clap and a pat on the back before sending him off stage. But now the glass was lowered, forgotten in his hand. His expression had changed completely. The amused smirk was gone, replaced by something between surprise and genuine curiosity. Tommy continued playing, his body beginning to sway slightly with the music. The classical piece was flowing beautifully, each phrase connected to the next like a story being told in a language that everyone understood, even if they couldn't speak it. The melody was melancholy but not sad, thoughtful but not heavy. It painted pictures in the air. Around the room, conversations had stopped. The bartender, who had been mixing a cocktail, set down his shaker and turned toward the stage. Waiters who had been moving between tables stood still, their trays balanced in their hands. Even the people who had come here just to be seen, just to say they'd been at the Blue Note on a Friday night, were paying attention now. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Then something magical happened. Tommy transitioned. The classical melody started to shift, to transform. He began weaving in jazz elements, taking Chopin's careful composition and breathing new life into it. His right hand kept the melody recognizable, but his left hand started adding jazz chords, complex harmonies that shouldn't have worked with a classical piece but somehow did. It was like watching two different worlds collide and create something entirely new. Devin pushed himself away from the bar and took a few steps closer to the stage. His trained ear could hear what was happening. This kid wasn't just playing notes he'd memorized. He was feeling the music, understanding it, having a conversation with it. The way he was blending classical technique with jazz sensibility showed a deep understanding of both worlds. Tommy's fingers moved faster now, more confident. He added a walking bass line with his left hand while his right hand danced up and down the keys, exploring different variations of the melody. Sweat was beginning to form on his forehead, but he didn't notice. His eyes were still closed, his face completely relaxed like he was somewhere far away. In that moment, Tommy wasn't in a crowded jazz club in New Orleans. He was back in his grandmother's house, the afternoon sun streaming through the lace curtains, the smell of her lavender perfume in the air. She was sitting beside him, her weathered hand resting gently on his shoulder, encouraging him to play from his heart, not from his head. "The piano will tell you what it wants to say," she used to tell him. "Your job is just to listen and help it speak." He could almost hear her voice now, gentle and warm, the way it always was when she talked about music. She had died 2 years ago, right before he started college. Lung cancer. It had been quick, which everyone said was a blessing, but Tommy had never felt blessed about it. He felt robbed. Robbed of more afternoons at the piano, more conversations about composers and chord progressions, more of her patient guidance when he got frustrated with a difficult passage. After she died, he couldn't bring himself to play. Every time he sat at a piano, all he could feel was the empty space where she used to be, so he stopped. He packed away that part of himself, convinced he'd never play again. What was the point without her there to share it with? But now, with his fingers on these keys, something had cracked open inside him. The grief was still there, but so was something else. Joy. Pure, simple joy in the act of making music. And maybe, just maybe, this was how he could keep her alive. Not by avoiding pianos because they reminded him of her, but by playing them because they reminded him of her. The tempo picked up. Tommy's whole body was moving now, rocking back and forth on the bench as the music swelled. He threw in some blues scales, his fingers running up and down the keys with increasing speed and complexity. The piece was building towards something, gathering energy like a wave rolling toward shore. A woman in the front row had tears in her eyes. She didn't know why exactly. She couldn't explain what this music was doing to her. But something about it was touching a place deep inside that rarely got touched. She wasn't alone. All around the room, people were experiencing something similar. Some felt goosebumps on their arms. Others felt a tightness in their throats. A few were smiling without realizing it. Music has that power sometimes. Real music, played with real emotion, can reach inside people and move things around, wake things up that have been sleeping. Devin was now standing right beside the stage, his drink completely forgotten on a nearby table. He was studying Tommy's hands, watching the technique, analyzing the choices being made. This kid had clearly been trained by someone who knew what they were doing. The classical foundation was rock solid, but there was also a natural musicality that couldn't be taught. You either had it or you didn't, and this kid had it in abundance. Jake had made his way closer to the stage too, his earlier laughter completely gone. He felt something strange in his chest. Pride maybe, or guilt? He had pushed Tommy up 3 seconds of complete silence. That's how long it lasted. 3 seconds that felt like an eternity to Tommy, who sat frozen on the piano bench, his hands still hovering above the keys, wondering if he'd somehow messed everything up. Then it happened. The explosion of sound was so sudden and so loud that Tommy actually jumped. The entire club erupted into applause. Not polite clapping, not the kind of applause you give because you're supposed to. This was real, thunderous, the kind that shakes you to your core. People were on their feet. Every single person in that packed room stood up, their hands coming together in a rhythm that sounded like rain on a metal roof. Shouts of bravo echoed from different corners. Someone whistled loudly. A group near the back was cheering like they'd just witnessed their team win a championship. Tommy's mind couldn't process what was happening. He turned slightly on the bench, looking at the sea of faces, all of them directed at him. These people, these strangers in their expensive clothes who had been laughing at him just minutes ago, were now giving him a standing ovation. His face flushed red. He didn't know what to do with his hands. Should he stand? Should he bow? Should he wave? He felt more exposed now than he had when he was actually playing. Jake was clapping so hard his palms were turning red. His mouth was hanging open in disbelief. He looked at Chris, who was still recording but also clapping with his free hand, his phone bobbing up and down with the motion. "Did you know?" Chris shouted over the noise. "Did you know he could play like that?" "No," Jake shouted back. "I mean, he said he took piano lessons, but I thought like basic stuff, not that." The applause continued, showing no signs of dying down. An elderly couple near the stage were holding hands, both with misty eyes. The woman leaned over to her husband and said something Tommy couldn't hear, but the man nodded in agreement, a soft smile on his weathered face. The bartender was shaking his head in amazement, grinning widely. He'd worked at the Blue Note for 15 years and had seen hundreds of performances. This would be one he'd remember. Then Devin Wright stepped forward. He was the first to reach the stage, his long legs carrying him across the floor with purpose. The crowd's noise dimmed slightly as people watched to see what the famous pianist would do. Devin extended his hand toward Tommy, who was still sitting there looking overwhelmed. "Stand up, son," Devin said, his voice warm. Tommy stood on shaky legs and took Devin's hand. The handshake was firm and Devin pulled Tommy slightly forward, turning him to face the audience properly, making sure everyone could see him. The applause swelled again. Devin leaned in close to Tommy's ear so he could be heard over the noise. "Where on earth did you learn to play like that?" Tommy's mouth felt dry. My grandmother taught me." "Your grandmother?" Devin pulled back slightly to look at Tommy's face. There was no joke in his expression, only genuine interest and something that looked a lot like respect. "She must have been one hell of a teacher." "She was," Tommy said, and he felt that familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he talked about her. "She was a classical pianist. Taught me since I was 4. Devin nodded slowly, his eyes studying Tommy like he was seeing him for the first time. "And the jazz? Where did you learn to blend styles like that?" Tommy shrugged, feeling embarrassed. "I don't know. I listened to a lot of different music. When I was playing, I just felt like doing something different, so I did." "You just felt like it," Devin repeated, a small smile playing at his lips. He shook his head in disbelief. "Kid, do you have any idea what you just did? That was extraordinary. How long has it been since you've played?" "About a year," Tommy admitted. "After my grandmother died, I stopped playing." Something shifted in Devin's expression. Understanding, maybe. Sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly, then louder. "But I think she'd be proud of what you just did up here tonight." The words hit Tommy harder than he expected. His eyes stung suddenly and he had to blink a few times. Maybe she would have been proud. Maybe that's what he'd been scared of all along. Not that he couldn't play anymore, but that he could. And it would hurt too much to remember how much she'd meant to him. The crowd was still applauding, though it had settled into a more sustainable rhythm. People were talking to each other, excited conversations about what they'd just witnessed. Phones were everywhere now, capturing this moment from every angle. Tommy didn't know it yet, but videos of his performance were already being uploaded to social media, already starting to spread. A woman in a red dress pushed her way toward the front. She had a camera with a professional-looking lens hanging around her neck. "Excuse me," she called up to the stage. "I'm with the Times-Picayune. Can I get your name and maybe ask you a few questions?" Tommy looked panicked. Devin caught his expression and held up a hand to the reporter. "Give him a minute, folks. Let the kid breathe." But more people were approaching now. A man in a suit who said he was a talent scout. A woman who ran a music school. Someone else who wanted to know if Tommy was interested in performing at their venue. It was overwhelming, all these adults with their business cards and their eager faces, treating him like he was somebody important. Jake finally made it through the crowd. He grabbed Tommy's arm, his face a mixture of excitement and apology. "Dude, that was insane. Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" "You never asked," Tommy said simply. "I never asked? Man, if I could do what you just did, I'd tell everyone. I'd have it on my resume, my dating profile, everything." Chris appeared beside them, still holding up his phone. "This is already getting views," he said, showing them his screen. "I posted it like 2 minutes ago and there's already 50 comments." Tommy stared at the phone. There he was on a tiny screen sitting at the piano with his eyes closed. The comments below were rolling in. "Who is this kid? This is incredible. Best thing I've seen all year. Why isn't he famous?" Devin was talking to the club manager, gesturing toward Tommy. The manager, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, kept nodding, occasionally glancing over at Tommy with a thoughtful expression. Finally, Devin turned back to Tommy, weaving through the people who were still hovering nearby. "Listen," he said, "I have a proposal for you. My second set starts in about 10 minutes. How would you feel about joining me?" Tommy's eye went wide. "Joining you? Like playing with you?" "That's exactly what I mean. An impromptu duet. We'll just see what happens, follow each other's lead. Unless you're too nervous." It was a challenge, but a friendly one. Devin's eyes were twinkling. I don't know if I can." Tommy started to say. You just played a classical piece and spontaneously transformed it into jazz fusion in front of 300 people, Devin said. I think you can handle playing with me. What do you say? When's the last time you're going to get an opportunity like this? Tommy's heart was hammering in his chest. This was Devin Wright, a man who had played with legends, who had albums that music students studied, and he was asking Tommy, a 19-year-old accounting major from Mississippi, to play with him. But there was something else too. A feeling that had been absent from Tommy's life for so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Excitement. Pure, simple, uncomplicated excitement about music. Okay, Tommy heard himself say. Yeah, okay. Devin's face broke into a wide grin. Excellent. Absolutely excellent. He clapped Tommy on the shoulder. Don't worry about anything. Just do what you did before. Play what you feel. The piano will tell you what it wants to say, right? Tommy froze. Those words. Those exact words. His grandmother's words. What did you say? Tommy asked. Just play what you feel, Devin repeated. Let the instrument guide you. That's what makes great music, not technical perfection. It wasn't exactly the same, but close enough. Maybe it was a common phrase among musicians. Or maybe it was a sign. Tommy didn't believe much in signs, but standing there in that jazz club, with his hands still tingling from playing and his grandmother's wisdom echoing in his ears from a stranger's mouth, he thought maybe, just maybe, there was something bigger happening here. The house lights started to dim again, signaling that the break was over. The crowd began moving back to their seats, but there was a different energy now. An anticipation. Word was spreading that something special was about to happen. Devin headed toward the stage, then paused and looked back at Tommy. You coming? Tommy took a deep breath. His hands weren't shaking anymore. His heart was still racing, but it was a good kind of racing. The kind you feel before something amazing. Yeah, he said, walking toward the stage. I'm coming. As he followed Devin back up to the piano bench, wasn't really made for two grown men, but somehow they made it work. Tommy sat on Devin's right side, their shoulders almost touching. He could feel the heat radiating from the stage lights above them and hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Devin's hands hovered over the lower keys while Tommy positioned himself over the higher register. They looked at each other and Devin gave him a small nod. No count-off. No discussion about what they were going to play. They were just going to start and see where the music took them. Devin began with a slow, bluesy progression. His left hand laid down a walking bass line while his right hand played lazy, relaxed chords. It was the kind of jazz that felt like a warm summer evening, easy and comfortable. He was giving Tommy space, creating a foundation for him to build on. Tommy listened for a moment, feeling the rhythm, understanding the pattern. Then he came in softly, adding a melody line that danced above Devin's chords. He kept it simple at first, just following the mood Devin had established, not trying to show off or take over. The audience, which had been buzzing with whispered conversations, fell silent again. They were witnessing something rare. Two musicians who had never played together before, finding each other through the music, communicating in a language that needed no words. Devin smiled without taking his eyes off the keys. The kid had good instincts. He knew when to lead and when to follow, when to add complexity and when to keep it simple. That was something you couldn't teach. Either you felt it or you didn't. They played through the first progression together, establishing a comfortable groove. Then Devin started to push it a little, adding more complex chord changes, testing Tommy to see if he could keep up. Tommy didn't miss a beat. His melody shifted and adapted, weaving through the new harmonies like he'd known they were coming. Jake was recording again, but this time his hands were steady. He was mesmerized. His roommate, the guy who spent Friday nights studying in their dorm room, the one who never went to parties and always seemed a little sad, was up there creating magic with one of the most famous jazz pianists in the country. The tempo increased gradually. Devin's bass line became more energetic, more insistent. Tommy matched the energy, his melody becoming bolder, taking more chances. They were starting to challenge each other now, each one throwing out musical ideas for the other to respond to. Devin played a quick run up the keys. Tommy answered with a rundown. Devin hit a surprising chord change. Tommy adapted and raised him a chromatic progression. It was like watching two people have an animated conversation, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at each other's jokes. The crowd was leaning forward in their seats. Even people who didn't know anything about music theory could feel what was happening. This wasn't just two people playing notes. This was connection. This was chemistry. Tommy felt something he hadn't felt in years, pure joy. Not the kind of happiness that comes from getting a good grade or finishing a difficult task. This was deeper than that. This was the feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do. His grandmother used to tell him that music was the closest thing we have to time travel. When you play, she'd say, you're connecting with everyone who's ever played that piece, everyone who's ever felt what you're feeling. You're part of something bigger than yourself. He understood what she meant now. In this moment, he wasn't just Tommy the accounting student. He was part of a tradition that stretched back centuries, part of a conversation that had no beginning and no end. Every pianist who had ever lived was somehow present in these notes, and he was adding his voice to theirs. Devin suddenly shifted into a minor key, the mood darkening. The playful energy became something more intense, more emotional. His chords grew heavier, more dramatic. Tommy followed him into this new territory, his melody turning melancholy, asking questions that the chords couldn't quite answer. A woman in the third row felt tears rolling down her cheeks. She didn't even know why. The music was just touching something inside her that rarely got touched. Beside her, her husband squeezed her hand, feeling it too. They built and built, the intensity growing with each passing measure. Tommy's fingers were flying across the keys now, no longer tentative, no longer questioning whether he belonged here. He belonged. He knew it in his bones. Then at the peak of the intensity, Devin did something unexpected. He stopped playing. Just like that, his hands lifted from the keys, leaving Tommy completely exposed, playing alone. For a split second, panic flickered through Tommy's mind. But Devin was looking at him with an encouraging expression, nodding slightly, giving him the floor. This was his moment. Devin was stepping back literally and musically to let Tommy shine. Tommy took the solo. His hands danced across the entire keyboard now, not confined to just the upper register anymore. He played with everything he had, pouring all his grief for his grandmother, all his confusion about his future, all his fear and hope and dreams into the music. The notes came out raw and honest. He played phrases that he'd learned from his grandmother mixed with jazz riffs he'd picked up from listening to records late at night in his dorm room. He played his small-town childhood and his big-city present. He played goodbyes and hellos, endings and beginnings. Devin watched with the expression of someone witnessing something special. In 30 years of performing, he'd played with countless musicians. Most were technically proficient. Many were talented. But few, very few, had this kind of genuine emotion in their playing. This kid was special. Really special. Tommy brought his solo to a climax, then began to pull it back, creating space for Devin to return. He simplified the melody, returning to something closer to where they'd started. It was an invitation. Devin accepted it, his hands returning to the keys. But this time he followed Tommy's lead. The kid who had been terrified on this same stage 20 minutes ago was now directing one of the world's best jazz pianists. And Devin was happy to let him do it. They played together again, but the dynamic had shifted. They were equals now, true partners in the music. Tommy's confidence had grown with every note, and it showed. His playing had become more assertive, more sure of itself. They moved through several more progressions, sometimes trading off, sometimes playing in unison, always listening to each other, always responding. The music ebbed and flowed like a tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes powerful, but always connected. The club owner stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed, a knowing smile on his face. He'd been in the business long enough to recognize when something significant was happening. This performance would be talked about for years. People would say, "I was there the night that kid played with Devin Wright." Chris had stopped recording. His phone battery had died, but he didn't even care. Some moments were too big for a screen anyway. This was one of those moments you just had to experience with your own eyes and ears, had to feel with your own heart. As they approached what felt like a natural ending, Tommy and Devin Lowe okayed at each other. No words were needed. They both knew it was time to bring it home. Devin started a final progression, something simple and beautiful, and Tommy added a melody on top that felt like a sunset, like the end of a perfect day. They slowed down together, the tempo decreasing naturally, organically. The final chord was simple, Just a major chord, nothing fancy, but played with such warmth and finality that it felt absolutely right. The last notes faded into silence. Tommy and Devon's hands lifted from the keys at exactly the same moment, like they'd been playing together for years instead of minutes. Before the applause could start, Devon turned to Tommy. "That," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration, "was one of the best musical experiences of my life." "Thank you." Tommy didn't know what to say. What do you say when your hero tells you something like that? "Thank you for letting me play with you," was all he could manage. "No, son. Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with music in the first place. The technique, the theory, all of that matters. But what you have, that raw emotion, that honesty in your playing, that's what makes music actually mean something." Then the applause came, and it was even louder than before. The entire club was on its feet again, and this time the cheering seemed to go on forever. People were shouting, whistling, applauding so hard their hands hurt. Devon stood and pulled Tommy up with him. They bowed together and the crowd roared its approval. Devon raised Tommy's hand like a boxing referee declaring a winner, making sure everyone knew that this young man, this unknown student, was someone to remember. Backstage, Devon's manager was already on his phone making calls. The talent scout who had approached earlier was furiously typing on his phone. The reporter from the newspaper was interviewing anyone who would talk to her, trying to find out everything she could about the mysterious pianist who'd appeared out of nowhere. But Tommy was oblivious to all of that. He was just standing on stage, his hand being held up by his musical hero, listening to hundreds of people cheer for him, and feeling more alive than he had in 2 years. Tommy couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his dorm room bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in his mind. His phone kept buzzing with notifications. Chris's video had gone viral. Actually viral. Not just a few hundred views. Hundreds of thousands. By morning it would be over 1 million. Jake was sitting at his desk scrolling through the comments and reading them out loud. "Listen to this one. I've been playing piano for 20 years and this kid is better than me. And this one, this is what pure talent looks like. Dude, people are losing their minds over this. Can you please stop?" Tommy said, pulling his pillow over his face. "Stop? Are you crazy? This is amazing. You're famous." "I'm not famous. It's just a video." "Just a video?" Jake turned around in his chair. "Tommy, music schools are commenting on this. Professional musicians are sharing it. Someone even said Quincy Jones's assistant liked it. Do you understand what's happening here?" Tommy did understand, and that's what scared him. His phone had 17 missed calls. Messages from people he'd never heard of. Interview requests. Performance offers. Someone wanted him to audition for a music competition show on television. It was overwhelming, but the scariest thing was the business card sitting on his desk. Devon Wright's card. The weight of possibility it represented felt heavier than it should. The next morning, Tommy went to his accounting class like normal. He sat in his usual seat, pulled out his notebook, tried to focus on the lecture about tax codes and depreciation schedules. But the numbers on the board might as well have been written in a foreign language. All he could think about was the feeling of his fingers on those piano keys, the way the music had flowed through him, the look on Devon's face when he'd said, "That's what makes music actually mean something." His professor, Mr. Henderson, was droning on about quarterly reports when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Mr. Brooks, is something more interesting than tax law occupying your mind today?" The class turned to look at Tommy. A few students were smirking, glad someone else was getting called out. "No, sir. Sorry, sir." But Mr. Henderson was looking at his computer screen, then back at Tommy with a strange expression. "You're the pianist. From the video." The class erupted in whispers. Several students immediately pulled out their phones. Yes, sir." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "My wife showed me that video last night. She's a music teacher. She was quite impressed." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Then he said, "Stay after class. I'd like to speak with you." Tommy's stomach dropped. Great. Now he was in trouble. When the other students filed out, giving Tommy curious looks as they passed, Mr. Henderson gestured for him to approach the desk. Tommy walked up slowly, preparing for a lecture about staying focused on his studies. "Sit down," Mr. Henderson said, his tone softer than usual. Tommy sat. "I'm going to tell you something I don't usually share with students," the professor began, leaning back in his chair. Before I became an accountant, I wanted to be a writer. Had notebooks full of stories, spent every free moment working on a novel. My parents thought it was impractical. Told me to get a real degree, a real job, so I did. I became an accountant. He paused, looking out the window. I'm 63 years old. I'm good at my job. I make decent money. I have a nice life. But you know what? Not a day goes by that I don't think about those stories I never finished. Not one day. Tommy felt a chill run down his spine. I saw that video. Mr. Henderson continued. I saw your face when you were playing. That's not the face of someone who should be calculating depreciation schedules for the rest of his life. That's the face of someone who's found what they're meant to do. But accounting is practical, Tommy said weakly. It's safe. Safe, Mr. Henderson repeated, almost laughing. Yes, it is. And there's nothing wrong with safe. But let me ask you something. When you're my age, looking back on your life, what do you want to see? A series of safe choices? Or the courage to chase something that made you feel alive? Tommy didn't have an answer. You're 19 years old. You have time to fail, time to struggle, time to figure it out. I didn't have that luxury at your age. Family circumstances, financial pressure. But you do. Don't waste it. That conversation haunted Tommy for the next 3 days. He went to classes, did his homework, maintained his routine. But everything felt different now. Every time he walked past the music building on campus, he'd stop and listen to the piano sounds drifting through the open windows. Every time he saw someone reading a music theory textbook in the library, he felt a pang of something that might have been envy. On Thursday afternoon, he finally picked up his phone and dialed the number on Devon's card. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone twice. Devon Wright, the voice answered after 2 rings. Hi, this is Tommy from the club. The Blue Note. Tommy, I was hoping you'd call. I was starting to think you'd chickened out. I've been thinking about what you said, about my future, and Tommy took a deep breath. I'm scared. Music doesn't feel practical. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? There was a pause. Then Devon's voice came through, warm and understanding. You want to know a secret? Every musician who's ever lived has felt that fear. I still feel it sometimes, and I've been doing this for 30 years. The fear never goes away. You just decide whether it's going to stop you or not. My grandmother would have wanted me to do something stable, something that pays the bills. Did you ever actually ask her what she wanted for you? Tommy thought back. To all those afternoons at the piano, to the way her eyes would light up when he mastered a difficult piece, to the things she used to say. She said music was the language of the soul. She said when I played, she could hear who I really was. Then I think you know what she would have wanted, Devon said gently. That night, Tommy sat down at one of the practice pianos in the music building. It was after hours, but he'd sweet-talked the janitor into letting him in. The room was small and slightly dusty, with motivational posters on the walls and the faint smell of rosin in the air. He put his fingers on the keys and started to play. Not for an audience, not for a video, just for himself. Just to see how it felt. It felt like coming home. 2 weeks later, Tommy walked into the registrar's office. The woman behind the counter looked up with a practiced smile. How can I help you? I need to change my major, Tommy said. His voice was steady. From accounting to music performance, she typed on her computer. Are you sure? That's a significant change. Have you spoken with an advisor? I'm sure. He filled out the forms, signed where he needed to sign, and walked out of that office feeling lighter than he had in years. Terrified, yes. Uncertain about the future, absolutely. But also excited in a way he hadn't felt since before his grandmother died. His parents didn't understand at first. There were difficult phone calls. His father kept asking about job prospects and financial security. His mother worried he was making an emotional decision he'd regret. But eventually, when he explained how he felt, when he told them about what Mr. Henderson had said, they came around. They didn't fully understand, but they supported him. Devon kept his word. He became not just a mentor, but a genuine friend. He introduced Tommy to other musicians, helped him find performance opportunities, gave him advice about the industry. You've got raw talent, Devon told him during one of their practice sessions. But talent alone isn't enough. You need discipline, dedication, and thick skin. This business will break your heart a dozen times. Are you ready for that? I don't know, Tommy admitted. But I'd rather have my heart broken doing something I love than spend my life wondering what if. Devin smiled. That's the right answer. 3 years passed. 3 years of practice rooms and performances, of late nights and early mornings, of rejection and small victories. Tommy performed at coffee shops and small venues. He entered competitions. He won some, lost others. He collaborated with other musicians, experimented with different styles, kept pushing himself to grow. The video from the Blue Note that night never really went away. It kept resurfacing, getting shared again every few months. People called it the moment a star was born, and proof that talent can't be hidden. Tommy was embarrassed by the attention, but grateful for the doors it opened. By his senior year of college, he was performing regularly at respected venues, not huge concerts or famous halls, but legitimate gigs that paid actual money. He'd released an album of original compositions that blended classical and jazz, a tribute to both his grandmother's teaching and Devin's influence. It didn't sell millions of copies, but it sold enough. It meant something to people. The biggest moment came when he was invited back to the Blue Note, this time as the headline act. His name was on the marquee outside. Tommy Brooks, it said, with a small note underneath. The pianist you need to hear. Jake and Chris came to that show, sitting in the front row cheering louder than anyone else. Mr. Henderson was there too, with his wife, both of them beaming with pride. And in the back, sitting quietly at a corner table, was Devin Wright, who had rearranged his tour schedule just to be there. Before Tommy played his first note, he looked out at the audience. This was the same stage where his life had changed 3 years ago. The same piano where he'd been pushed up as a joke and discovered he could still feel joy through music. He thought about his grandmother, about how she'd always believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. He thought about Mr. Henderson's regret, and how close he'd come to living someone else's idea of a practical life. He thought about Devin's encouragement and Jake's accidental push that had started everything. Good evening, he said into the microphone. 3 years ago, I stood on this stage for the first time. I was terrified. I hadn't played piano in over a year. My friends pushed me up here as a joke. The audience laughed knowingly. Many of them had seen the video. But something happened that night. I remembered why I loved music. I remembered what my grandmother taught me, that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. It's about being brave enough to share what's in your heart, even when you're scared. He turned to the piano. This first piece is called Grandmother's Song. I wrote it last year, on what would have been her 75th birthday. It's everything I never got to say to her, everything I wish I'd thanked her for, all put into music. He began to play, and the room fell silent. The melody was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once, telling the story of a boy and his grandmother and the gift she'd given him that had saved his life. When he finished the last note, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, including his own. Tommy had made his choice, not the safe one, not the practical one, but the one that felt true. And standing there on that stage doing what he loved, sharing his music with people who wanted to hear it, he knew it was the right choice. His grandmother would have been proud. When they finally left the stage, Devin turned to Tommy one more time. Listen, I want you to think about something. What's your major in school? Accounting, Tommy said, almost embarrassed to admit it now. Devin nodded slowly. And is that what you want to do with your life? Crunch numbers in an office somewhere? Tommy hesitated. 2 hours ago, he would have said yes without thinking. It was practical. It was safe. It was what responsible people did. But now, after what he'd just experienced, after feeling that joy again, he wasn't so sure. I don't know anymore, he admitted. Good, Devin said. Not knowing is the first step to figuring it out. Here's my card. I'm serious about this. Call me. We need to talk about your future because, kid, I don't think it involves spreadsheets. Tommy took the card with shaking hands. It was thick, expensive cardstock with embossed lettering. Devin Wright with a phone number and email address. I will, Tommy promised. I'll call you. Make sure you do. What you have is too special to waste. The piano, back to where just minutes ago he'd been terrified and embarrassed. Tommy felt something shift inside him. Maybe accounting wasn't his path after all. Maybe there was another road. One he'd been too scared to consider, too afraid to walk down without his grandmother beside him. But perhaps she was beside him. Not in body, but in every note he played. In every lesson she taught him. In every afternoon they'd spent together at that old upright piano. Devin took his seat at the piano and gestured for Tommy to sit beside him on the bench. It was going to be tight, but they'd make it work. The crowd settled into their seats, buzzing with excitement. Tommy sat down, feeling the warmth of the stage lights on his face. Devin flexed his fingers and looked at Tommy with a smile. "Ready?" Tommy nodded. "Then let's make some music." Here is a joke, expecting to embarrass him, expecting a funny story to tell later. Instead, he was watching his quiet, boring roommate command a room full of strangers with nothing but his fingers and a piano. Chris was filming on his phone, but his hands were shaking slightly. He'd been roommates with Tommy for over a year, and had no idea this talent was hiding beneath the surface. Tommy had never mentioned being able to play like this, never even hinted at it. The music was reaching its peak now. Tommy's fingers were flying across the keys, both hands working together to create a sound that was big and bold and impossible to ignore. The melody from the Chopin piece was still there, woven through everything like a golden thread, but it had been transformed into something entirely new. Something that belonged only to this moment in this room with these people listening. And then, just when it seemed like the music couldn't get any bigger, Tommy brought it down. Slowly, carefully, he began to pull back. The volume decreased. The tempo slowed. His fingers moved more gently across the keys, returning to that soft, delicate touch from the beginning. The jazz elements faded away and the classical melody emerged again, pure and simple. He played the final phrase with such tenderness that it felt like saying goodbye to someone you love. The last note hung in the air, sustained by the pedal, slowly fading until it disappeared completely into silence. Tommy's hands lifted from the keys. He opened his eyes and blinked like someone waking up from a dream. For a moment he seemed confused about where he was. Then he heard nothing. Absolute silence. The entire club was frozen. Irigo, his grandmother. The thought of her made his chest tighten. She was the one who had taught him to play, starting when he was just 4 years old. Every day after school he'd go to her house and they'd sit together at that old piano. She'd been a classical pianist in her younger years, before life and responsibilities had pulled her in different directions. Teaching him had been her joy, her way of keeping that part of herself alive. The audience was getting restless. Someone coughed. Tommy heard a whisper from nearby. Is he actually going to play or just sit there? He looked down at the keys. 88 black and white rectangles that suddenly seemed like the most intimidating thing in the world. What was he even doing up here? He was an accounting student who hadn't seriously played in months, about to perform in front of hundreds of people who just watched one of the world's best jazz pianists. But then he remembered something his grandmother used to say. Music isn't about being perfect, Tommy. It's about being honest. You play what you feel and let everything else fall away. Tommy closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He let his fingers rest on the keys, feeling the cool smoothness of the ivory, and then blocking out everything else in the room, all the watching eyes, all the expectations, all the fear. He began to play.